If you're an MYP educator, you already know that planning is pretty much the backbone of everything we do, right? But what if that backbone is about to get, well, a major adjustment? Today, we're going to explore the ever-evolving world of MYP planning. We'll dive deep into some of the proposed changes from the Enhancing the MYP project that could really, truly change how we all work.
So, does this question hit a little too close to home? Yeah, for a lot of us, there are those moments, right, where it feels like the sheer volume of paperwork is just overshadowing the amazing, purposeful curriculum we're actually trying to build. Well, if you feel that way, you're not alone. It's a super common feeling, and it turns out it's something the IB has been hearing loud and clear.
Okay, so here's our game plan for today. First, we're going to set the stage and look at the foundation of MYP planning as it is right now. Then, we'll get into why things are changing, what sparked this whole evolution. We'll check out the pilot project, and then, the fun part, get our hands on the new planning toolkit. And to wrap it all up, we'll zoom out and talk about what this could actually mean for you and your school.
All right, let's start by setting the stage. Before we can really talk about where we might be going, we have to be absolutely crystal clear on where we are right now. So let's talk about the core documentation requirements for the MYP. So as it stands, the MYP's written curriculum really rests on three main pillars. You've got your unit plans, right? The day-to-day stuff. Then you've got the subject group overviews, which kind of map everything out big picture. And finally, those approaches to learning, the ATL planning charts that track how we're developing skills across the whole program.
And the glue that holds all these documents together? Well, that's vertical and horizontal planning. Vertical planning is all about making sure learning flows logically from one year to the next, building on what came before. And horizontal planning? That's the cross-curricular teamwork, the collaboration within a single grade level. When they work together, you get that seamless, coherent experience for our students.
So that's the system we all know. But if it's so clearly laid out, you might be asking, why the need for a major rethink? And that's a great question. It brings us right to the why behind this whole evolution in MYP planning. And this quote from school feedback, man, it just gets right to the heart of it. Educators were saying that the huge amount of documentation was causing a lot of duplicated work. But here's the real kicker. It was sometimes getting in the way of the meaningful integration they were trying so hard to create. Basically, the process was starting to swamp the purpose. So, what happened? Well, in response to all that feedback, the IB kicked off the Enhancing the MYP project. This is the big initiative where all these potential new ways of doing things are being cooked up and tested out. Okay, before we dive any deeper, I have to put up a big flashing sign here. This is super important. Everything we're about to talk about comes from a beta trial. These are just proposed changes being tested by schools as we speak. They are not final. So think of this as a sneak peek of what could be, not a guarantee of what's definitely coming.
So what's the big idea behind all this? Honestly, it boils down to one word: empowerment. The goal is to move away from a rigid, one-size-fits-all approach and instead really focus on flexibility and coherence. It's all about giving schools more power, more agency to design documentation that actually works for their students in their context with their local requirements.
All right, let's get into the good stuff. Let's open up this new planning toolkit. And really, don't think of this as a new set of rigid rules. It's more like a collection of flexible, powerful tools. Let's break down some of the biggest shifts they're testing out.
First on the list, the statement of inquiry. You know the old formulaic way, right? Key concept, related concepts, global context. Well, the pilot is shifting away from that. Instead, it's a much more flexible inquiry statement or question. There are fewer rules about how you have to structure it. And get this, making that global context connection explicit in the statement is now optional. The whole point is just to let teachers create more authentic, more engaging questions to drive their units.
Okay, next, MYP concepts are getting a huge makeover. Say goodbye to that strict hierarchy of key and related concepts. The pilot scraps that. Instead, there's just one consolidated list of specified concepts. But here's the real game changer. Schools have the flexibility to use concepts that aren't even on the list if it makes more sense for their local curriculum or their students. That's a big deal.
And what about the ATL planning chart? The one that's mandatory and, let's be real, can be a little cumbersome. Well, that's being completely reimagined. The pilot replaces it with something called flexible documentation. This means schools can literally design their own system for tracking ATL skills. Or even better, just weave it into the documents they're already using. It's a massive shift from just checking a box to real, purposeful design.
So you might be wondering, okay, so how do we document ATLs in our unit plans now? It's actually way simpler. In your unit plan, you just have to show you're planning for ATL skills in one of two ways. You can either detail the process you're going to use to explicitly teach a skill, or you can outline the learning experience where students will get a chance to practice that skill. That's it. It's so much more direct and practical.
Okay, so we've been looking at the nitty-gritty, the unit-level changes. But what happens when you zoom out? How do these shifts affect the big picture, the program-wide planning? Let's take a look.
Check this out. This gives you a really clear idea of what a new unit plan could look like, stripped down to the essentials. So, the required stuff? It's the heart and soul of the MYP, right? Unit concepts, the inquiry statement or question, a global context, ATL skills, and a simple yes or no for community engagement. But here's the amazing part. Look at what's now listed as optional for the unit plan itself. All the detailed content, the specific assessment details, even the subject group objectives. It doesn't mean they disappear. It just means they can be documented somewhere else, giving teachers a ton of flexibility.
Okay, so we've covered the what and the why. But now we get to the most important question of all. So what? What does this all actually mean for your school? Let's talk about what this really is, which is a massive opportunity for innovation.
So if these changes do stick, it's a fundamental shift, no doubt about it. What does it mean? It means more power for schools to design a curriculum that actually fits who they are. It means less time spent on paperwork and more time focusing on what really matters, meaningful integration. And at the end of the day, it's a huge move away from just being compliant and a move toward purposeful, creative design that truly empowers teachers and coordinators.
And that brings us to one last big question to leave you with. When the focus shifts away from just filling out forms and moves toward real, authentic, pedagogical design, what does that unlock for you? With all this new freedom and less top-down prescription, how will you and your school innovate? How will you create a curriculum that is uniquely, authentically yours? It's a pretty exciting future to think about, isn't it?